and how happy they were to light up our Christmas tree, and then Santa coming after the tree was lit, and just a festive. So I just want to thank the festive event, and I just want to thank the downtowners for this. My understanding is the 73rd tree lighting event that we've had here in the city of Oxnard. And additionally, we also had a really, really great downtown Christmas parade. And my understanding is, I wanted to call Gary. It looked to me like we had, I'm saying hundreds, but I think it was thousands. Chief, I'm not sure how many people we had out there. Any idea? I know there was probably maybe 1,000 people from A Street over just to C Street. Just packed. And it was just great to see the kids and the families again. And while they were stopped, that we had the announcers talking to some of the individuals at the parade. And I was with my wife as we turned around into Fifth Street. And for whatever reason, we were stopped, and this little girl goes over and just wanted to touch my wife's hand. And she went out there just to touch her hand, and we'll let her go. And the mom says, "Mija," in Spanish, she says, "You already touched the lady's hand, let her go." So she just did not want, and my wife just thought it was just the greatest thing that ever happened to her. But that's how festive things were, how great people were participating in the parade. And of course, you also, after that, or during that time, we had the Tamale Festival. And the Tamale Festival, my understanding is that I think it was Channel 4 or 5 came over to Oxnard and interviewed Mr. Blum, and we had people from throughout Southern California come to the Tamale Festival, which was really, really great. So, and again, to everybody, happy holidays, and I hope everybody has a great time in the next couple of weeks, here in Oxnard. So thank you for that.
Hey, and I know I'm coming again. Mayor, I got to agree. I've been through several parades. This was the best, I think. And this is more kids than I've ever seen in a parade. More little kids. I've never seen this many little kids. But I want to share with the public. There is some basic rules. The people that put the parade on, they put the parade on, the individuals that want to be in the parade, there's a fee involved, and there are rules and regulations, and you have to sign them.
That's
and
right.
One of them is you don't throw candies or things into the crowd because somebody can get hurt. And if you can't abide by the rules, you can be potentially asked to not come back or maybe even removed. And whether you're an elected official, a social organization, a religious organization, a private firm, you sign, and those are the rules. If you can't abide by the rules, it's like something else we discussed tonight. I hope that they follow their guidelines and you're not invited back. Because when somebody gets hurt, they will also come back for the city of Oxnard. And being the city of Oxnard, the assumption is you have deep pockets and sky's the limit with money. When the person didn't follow the rules, they should be held liable. My opinion as a council member.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, our next item is item J. This is review of the information consent agenda items. And we have 1 to 7 items. And my understanding is that Councilman Toronto wants to recuse himself from item number 5. And we do have some speakers on this item. And we'll start off with, before we continue, we'll start off with Carla Alejandra. She wants to speak on L1 or through L8. I'm not sure exactly how many items she wants to speak of. Carla?
Carla, please press star 6 to unmute, and you have 3 minutes.
Carla, you got 3 minutes.
I was muted. I do apologize for that.
Okay.
It's on item L8. A few weeks ago.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Is it okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, L8, excuse me. I thought that we were, you wanted to speak on consent. That is consent? Okay. Okay, yes. Go ahead. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. A few weeks ago and tonight, actually, some people spoke at the city council meeting regarding the Oxnard Police Department obtaining more military equipment. Many of us were vocal about our opposition to this. Many of us have been vocal for years on how much the city budget is given to the OPD and how much leeway is given for OPD in general. When many of us speak of being against the militarization of the police, it is because we recognize that at a national level, this country gives the military more money than they should. For many of us, criticism of the police also extends to the criticism of the military, especially in Oxnard, where we live between two military bases. When people come to voice these concerns at the city council, it is because they believe that the council can consider what is said unbiasedly. Yet tonight, Gabriela Basua will be appointed to the RDP 21, which is a pro-military advocacy group that lobbies for the interests of the military, defense contractors, and the bases around Oxnard, as per their website. Upon some research, it was found that Gabe Turan is also a representative for the RDP 21, as per the RDP 21 website. Further research also showed that John Zaragoza was a supervisor for the County of Ventura back in 2011 when the RDP 21 was first proposed. How can we remain assured that the city will unbiasedly listen to the concerns regarding the military and the militarization of the police department when the city allows city council members and city officials to be a part of this organization? And my biggest concern, honestly, is why is this not more publicly disclosed? And also, lastly, I just kind of want to close off on the whole street vendor, food vendor thing. I honestly just think that it's high-key funny and amusing how a lot of you use this excuse that, you know, the permits and they make sure that vendors are hygienic and they have access to gray water and clean water and they can wash their hands. Man, y'all don't even give us public bathrooms in downtown Oxnard, okay? If we're hanging out in La Plaza or La Placita, we have to pay to use the bathroom. We have to go to Starbucks and pay, or go to the theater and pay, go to Subway and pay to use the bathroom. And not to mention the bathrooms in the parks in South Oxnard. So it's just really funny to me that y'all use this like, oh no, we have to be clean and hygienic. People have to wash their hands. Man, some of us have been begging for bathrooms in South
30
Oxnard
seconds.
in parks for years. So I mean, you can use these justifications for other people, but like I said, I've been watching y'all for a really long time, and I listen to every single thing that you say. So you're gonna have to try harder with your justifications.
Okay, our next speaker is Teresa Tejas. Teresa Tejas. Is she available? Is she? And we're going to be followed by Monica Phillips.
Hello, Mayor, council members. My name is Teresa Tejas. I'm the coordinator of work-based learning for Oxnard Union High School District. Thank you, guys. I'm just here to speak on L5, the MOU between the city of Oxnard and Oxnard Union High School Districts to create the Oxnard Fire Technology After School Program. I am the coordinator, and I am the one who recruits all of the students district-wide. I just wanted to give a couple success stories. Our other after-school programs are Global Trade and Logistics, which is ran through the Port of Hueneme, DRAG and Pre-Engineering, which is ran through NAFC, and Community Law, which is ran through Oxnard PD. These programs help our students gain experience in these different industry sectors. They're able to gain credit while in the programs. And because of that, we've been able to have some pretty successful stories. In Global Trade, they actually offer a paid internship for any student that takes the course. What this has developed is actually students transferring and working for the port. We currently have a student, an alumni of our schools, plus the program that is currently working there. DRAG has been able to have, I'm just going to mention one, there's been quite a few. One student took the program for 1 year, and because it is an automotive program, they were able to transfer that and say, I want to go into automotive, and he now has his own automotive business, so that's been awesome here in Oxnard. Pre-engineering transfers to paid internships while the student is in college. So after graduation, they're able to go on to college and go on to a paid internship here locally and hopefully transfer into engineering here locally as well. Community Law has had students successfully complete the program and also go into the cadet program and then transfer into employment as well. So I just wanted to give you guys a couple success stories. When you consider approving that, it would help feed into your future local workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. I know the chief is working pretty hard on that. Thank you. Okay, Monica Phillips.
Hello and good evening. Thank you, City Council members, for allowing us to be here. My name is Monica Philippi. I'm the Director of Career Education with the Oxnard Union High School District. I'm here to speak on the memorandum as well between the City of Oxnard Fire Department and the Oxnard Union High School District, which works to establish to build an employee pipeline that meets one of the 6 identified goals in the Oxnard Fire Department 5-year strategic plan, particularly related to recruitment and investing in strategies aimed at hiring and increasing diversity as firefighters locally. So I wanted to express our excitement and our commitment and our partnership together with this Oxnard Fire After School program. We've been sharing it with our teachers and our students and our counselors. They're really excited to get it started. Our projected date is spring 2024. And we're just, Oxnard Union, my department, the Career Technical Education Department, we're committed to making sure that we promote this program. We've already worked on the marketing materials. All staff, support staff, will be dedicated for the recruitment, the marketing, the enrollment, the coordinating, the liaison work from the kids to the parents to the families, to make sure that this program is a success and we grow together as a partnership. We also have partnered with the Oxnard College Fire Technology Program. So our students not only are going to start with this, but we're also partnering with them. So we build this pipeline where students can go and take classes with the Fire Technology Program at Oxnard College. And we will pay for the expenses to get the kids over there and matriculate and register for those prerequisite courses. And the big overall goal, and I think we've actually done this quite well with a lot of our career technical education programs with the City of Oxnard, is really building the local talent of the Oxnard community and making sure that we keep our talent local and we keep it here and we grow together. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for the continued support with our Oxnard Union High School District.
Thank you, and I know that our chief's working on the diversity program. Thank you so much. I think it's going to be successful with your help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, let me see, we have Caterina Maldonado. Calderina Maldonado.
Hello, Mayor Zaragoza and Oxnard City Council. My name is Katrina Maldonado, and I am the Community and Development Relationships Coordinator for the Autism Society of Ventura County. I also play an active role in the Advocacy Committee. And I'd like to send a quick shout out to my son, who is celebrating a 9th birthday today, Hendrix Madrano.
Congratulations.
Yes, my son is autistic, so it's a great pleasure to be here with you folks today. As our organization has a mission to provide families of Ventura County with resources and programs to help them on their journey, I would like to share one of our priorities as it relates to employment that seems relevant to the item before you. Employment. Seek to increase the employment rate for people with autism. Presume that they are capable of competitive employment, community service, volunteerism, or appropriate day activities. Promote creation of programs to build capacity for providing competitive employment to every person who desires it. Expand on programs such as the Department of Rehab, Workforce Development Board, PathPoint, Regional Center, interns, ARC employment, and the opportunities for people with autism to live their fullest life professionally. The Autism Society of Ventura County and its Advocacy Committee supports the effort to secure a memorandum of agreement, the City of Oxnard Fire Department, as well as Oxnard Union High School District, for an after-school program to introduce high school students to fire service. The Autism Society of Ventura County supports CTE and other programs that offer youth a pathway to a skill or trade that can lead to employment. This is a great opportunity for Oxnard's youth, and we celebrate this collaboration. We encourage a review of the processes that would be used to ensure that they do not screen out potential candidates, so students with disabilities and at-risk youth may not necessarily see themselves as candidates and may not be able to present themselves as candidates by asking to participate. It is imperative that all students receive the support and encouragement that they need to access this program. All students in Oxnard Union High School District should be offered this opportunity. It is important to discuss and learn about disability, access, and reasonable accommodations as you engage in these conversations. Autism Society sees that this is an opportunity for students with disabilities and at-risk youth to be seen as, quote, at promise. I know that we all agree that the best people to protect and serve the residents of Oxnard are those that live and grew up here. Again, we support and celebrate this collaboration. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Pat Brown.
I want to speak on L1, 4, and 7. No, I'll make it as fast as I can. Amending the unit parking. It's unfortunate that we tend to want to build more business, more shopping, so forth, without parking. And housing, rental housing, and not have enough parking. It would be nice if we could require one for each bedroom, one car for each bedroom. So if you got 4 bedrooms, you got 4 cars. If you got 3 bedrooms and the living room sofa that makes out into a bed, that's classed as a 4. We are having a severe problem with parking, and nobody seems to know about it unless you live in a multifamily housing place like I do. Where I only have 1 car, but I have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a laundry room, etc., etc. I've got everything, and yet I only have 1 car, and I have a terrible problem. I have 2 guest parking spaces out in front of my place, but I can't invite anyone over because they're always full. And as somebody moves out, somebody else moves in. That's just the way it is. They're parking in the streets, in the mobile home park. They're parking in the streets. They're not allowed to, but they're doing it anyway because all these people have families and other families coming and staying with them all the time, and because they don't have enough another place to live, and so this happens continuously. And I've been there since 1993, and it's continuous, okay? It was supposed to be an adults only, 55 and older, but that didn't last. So that's what we've got is lots and lots of families. So anyway, that is a problem that we need to deal with here in town. Yeah, I mean, I could see people parking on Oxnard Boulevard and taking up you have 2 lanes coming in each direction. I can see people parking in that second lane if they don't have another place to park. We have a large used car lot that's empty.
Thank you, Pat.
And we ought to put in housing in there.
Thank you.
On Oxnard Boulevard. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Madam Clerk, any other speakers on this item?
Mayor Zaragoza, there's no additional speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Okay, council members?
5, 6, and 8.
5, 6, and 8, go ahead.
On number 5, the concept I think is great. I think it's hats off to the fire department for doing this. A little bit of acid indigestion is having to trust the Oxnard Union High School Board of Trustees and the superintendent after how I feel our city was treated with respect to trying to make the safety issues at the brand new high school comply with what the safety rules were. But I support this, but I needed to share that with the public because facts matter. The second one is on 6. Yeah, it's the item that I have on page 189. We're talking about single-room occupancy, and they define what a single-room occupancy management could be. An single-room occupancy, SRO, is a form of permanent, affordable rental housing made up of a small, often furnished, single-room units where tenants usually, I repeat, usually share a kitchen, bathroom, and laundry. I would like to know, what is the minimum legal size for a single-room occupancy?
Do we have a, okay, Joe?
Sorry, no, Councilmember Perrello, just looking for the minimum size. I believe it was slightly smaller. So the SRO minimum unit size is 150 square feet.
I beg your pardon?
Is 150 square feet for the SRO.
Thank you very much. That's all I need. Mr. Pearson, thank you very much. Thank you. And on the last one, there was a comment earlier about L8. The comments, I didn't follow them, but I do remember, and Mayor or any other member of the council, please.
I'm going to comment on that too.
Okay, please correct me if I'm wrong. There was always talk about the Regional Defense Partnership, and one of the main things was, at the time, this is a few years ago, it was to make sure we don't lose 18,000 jobs that are tied in with those things. It isn't that we're going to buy military stuff and militarize our police department. It's to take care of the civil service jobs, majority of which come out of the city, and 18,000 jobs. You lose 18,000 jobs. Let me tell you, this city's going to be hurting. So I compliment the representatives for this community that have been on this thing and served on this. Those are my only comments.
Let me, wonder, wait, but I'll talk on item 8. You know, that if people remember initially the way RDP 21 was put together is because of the BRAC. It was the Base Realignment Act. And what the DOJ wanted to do, or the Defense Department wanted to do, was close Point Mugu. And they figured, hey, we had, in fact, they found Russian submarines right off our coast. And the Chinese were upon us too, and we had no defense on the West Coast at all. And all the money was going to go over to the East Coast. And so the BRAC, or the RDP 20 was put together to lobby the policymakers in D.C., to lobby the generals. In fact, we went to the Pentagon, we went to the to all the other units there at the in D.C., and also to the policymakers to make sure that they did not close our base. And also the thing was that they brought a lot of money to the Naval Base Ventura County to put, they have another laser unit that they want to put together in order to keep the base from closing. So we ended up with something like almost 20,000 jobs, 20,000 jobs here for the base, potentially approximately. And about 40% of those jobs are Oxnard jobs and the rest of the surrounding community. But RDP B-21 was put together or formed together for the defense of the West Coast of the United States of America. And I think that was extremely, extremely important that we defend our country, to defend the United States of America. And I was very proud to serve on that committee for many, many years. And again, I think that one of the important things was that it's the highest employer in the whole county for that matter. But it was because of the BRAC program, and the Department of Defense wanted to close the bases here in the western part of the United States, which is really our main defense right now.
There was hopes for military cutbacks, and it pitted communities against each other.
Exactly.
And I wish Councilmember Basu all the best of luck, because again, it's a tremendous amount.
And Councilman Turan did a really good job with RDP 21. Now Councilman Basu is going to continue from that point. Right? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just some quick things for L5 and L8. L5 is quick. I just want to state for the public record that on this vote, I will be recusing myself from consent item L5. As with previous items, just due to the nature of my full-time day job and doing work directly with the Oxnard Union High School District, I will be recusing myself from that agreement with them. And then for L8, just regarding some of the comments made, the staff report, which is published with the agenda, 12 days ahead of the meeting and is a public document, does state, and it's one of the shorter staff reports, some of them can be lengthy, but this one does state that I was appointed in December of 2022 at a public meeting, and that was at a city council meeting when that happened, and I believe I was appointed to that and Beacon on the same night, and I still will continue to serve on the Beacon committee. I replaced former council member Vianney Lopez, who then became supervisor, and the representation for the city of Oxnard was vacated. And so I was appointed to fill that vacancy. And there's only one person from the city of Oxnard who will be representing the city on RDP 21. So Councilwoman Basua is not being added in addition to me. I'm actually being removed from RDP 21, and Councilwoman Basua is taking my place. So just so that's clear for the public, from what I picked up from the comments, it sounded like we're gonna have multiple people serving, and I just wanted to make that clear, as well as the fact that it's been at a public meeting when I was appointed, now that she's being appointed. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Council members, any other comments? If not, we need a motion. But Mr. City Manager, do we have to run, does it have to leave the dais for the number 5 or just vote?
Not for consent item agendas.
Not for consent, okay.
Yeah.
So
Consent
we need a
agenda items.
motion to approve the consent. And of course, Mr. Councilman Tron will excuse himself from 5.
I'll move the recommended action.
Moved by Councilman Perrello,
Second.
second by Councilman Valenzuela. Please vote.
Motion passes 5-0.
Kim,
Do you need to
does
say?
he, okay, now for,
So motion passed 5-0 with Councilmember Tehran recused.
recuse him from 5. Are we okay with that, Mr. City Attorney?
I'm sorry. Motion passes 5-0 with Councilmember Tehran recused from item L5.
Okay, so that, correct me if I'm wrong, was that a vote just on item L5?
I believe the item was for all consent items,
all of them.
based on what I picked up
All
from the motion,
with the-
with the,
Okay, just for clarity then, the motion was,
We voted on all items
The motion was for everything.
for everything except for.
and I'm recusing
the
from
noting the
L5.
recusal. So the city clerk can note for the record that what the vote on the approval of the balance of the consent items was, and then that special recusal on item
Item 5.
L5.
Yes, correct.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're good? Thank you. Okay, our next item is item M1. This is reports. This is the Housing Department, subjects acquisition of real property located at 131 East 7th Street, and the disposition of real property located at 418 West 4th Street in the downtown Oxnard. Recommendation that the city council find that the recommended actions do not constitute a project subject to the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to section 21065 of CEQA and section 15004B 4 and 15378 of the state CEQA guidelines, and as such, no environmental document pursuant to CEQA is required. 2, approval of the disposition of the approved real property located at 418 West 4th Street in the amount of $400,000 for future private use. 3, approval of the acquisition of unimproved real property located at 131 East 7th Street in the amount of $430,000 for the future development of affordable housing. 4, approve and authorize a budget of $30,000 from the Housing in lieu fees, Fund number 360, Subfund 7050, available fund balance, and authorize an exchange of value for completion of 2 transactions. 5, approve and authorize the budget appropriation of $75,000 from the Housing in lieu fees, Fund 30, Subfund 7050, available fund balance for necessary transaction in future maintenance and cost. And 6, authorize the city manager or designate to execute any and all documents necessary to facilitate the transaction. And this item did not originate in committee, and we do have a Measure M pre-recorded presentation by Mr. Emilio Ramirez. Council members, any questions on this item? And before we continue, we do have a speaker, Pat Brown. You want to go, Pat, you want to speak on this item? And then we'll go with Mr. Ramirez. Item M1.
I know that you're not going to agree with this, but I have to say this because I'm the neighborhood chair along the east side of Oxnard Boulevard from the 3rd Street Bridge all the way down into South Oxnard, where I rarely go. But anyway, I have a real problem. I don't have enough parks for the children that live in my neighborhood. It's mostly multifamily housing, and we're putting in more of it right now, and we plan to put in more of it. So it's almost all of it is multifamily housing, and there's not a park. There's no place. And the only place that I can see that would be of any size that would be good enough would be this place on East 7th Street. But that's just my personal opinion. I know that you won't agree with me, but I have to say something about it because I'm the neighborhood chair, and I have been for a number of years, and nobody else wants it because they don't want to have to get up and say these things either. So I'm stuck. But I just wanted you to know that we need a sizable park. We had one on 7th Street. We had one on the south side of the street. That next to the Boys and Girls Club was a nice park. But they took it, the city decided they wanted multifamily housing in there instead. And so we've got condos in there, and it's just full. And there's hardly any place for the kids to play that live in there. There are little lawns out in front along the street, but they're certainly not big enough for kids to really throw a ball or anything, because if they did, they'd hit a car going by. So we've got a serious problem. It's not just the kids that live on 7th Street that they took the park away to put in the housing, but it's all up and down Oxnard, the east side of Oxnard Boulevard, from Driffle and in that area between Woolley, actually, between Woolley to the south and 5th Street to the north, or 3rd Street actually, to the north along the east side of Oxnard Boulevard. There's no parking, and there's a whole lot of kids there, and there's going to be more. So unfortunately, I have to be the person to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we do have Mr. Emilio Ramirez. Council members, any questions on this item? Councilman Turan?
Excuse me, Mayor Zaragoza.
I'm sorry, is there any more speakers?
There's no additional speakers
thank you.
virtually or in person for this item.
Thank you. Councilman Turan?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez, for the information on this item. The parcel we're looking at on 7th Street, near the corner of 7th and Meta Street. The larger parcel itself is split into smaller parcels, correct? And we're looking at purchasing one of those. Is that correct?
Almost, Councilman. Emilio Ramirez, Housing Director. The site itself is 3 parcels, and we own the majority of the site already. the city, the housing authority, the city, et cetera, we own the majority of that vacant land. There is a parcel that's in the middle between two vacant lands that we own that is privately owned, and that middle parcel, the one that's in the middle between what the city otherwise owns, is what we are proposing to acquire at this point.
Thank you. And I bring that up because this is something that's come to the council in the past, this particular location, and I know it says there's potential for mixed use in the future at this, and this actually overlaps with my days as a Parks and Rec Commissioner, where we were hoping that this parcel could be purchased for the purpose of open space, as Ms. Brown was alluding to. And I asked that question because this may be new for some folks, and if this were a Netflix show, they'd say previously on 7th and Meta, this is what happened, right? So we own the two parcels on the sides. In the center, we have the one that's privately owned that is in front of us right now. I ask that because Ms. Brown brings up some important points regarding open space in that particular neighborhood. And since that time, when this discussion originally started, we have another development happening in this particular neighborhood that could have a long parcel that could be open space, correct? As well as another parcel that we're looking at for the city to potentially be additional open space within the same maybe 2-block corridor. Does that sound correct?
I think so, sir. There is a development that is underway right now by a nonprofit developer called Many Mansions. And that development has two phases, two halves. In the middle between that, there is a strip of land that will be an open space area. There's also city-owned properties that are along Meta and along 6th Street that are not yet defined for its ultimate use, which could be open space as well.
All right, thank you. And so that's been helpful because I think early on in my time as a council member, this came up, and that's where there was some really big overlap with what the desire was of the Parks and Rec Commission when I served on there, and then what the plan was moving forward from housing for this particular parcel. So I'm glad to hear that and have the public hear that there is potential for some open space in that neighborhood, with even more potential for possibly additional open space depending on how things play out. So I just wanted to have that stated for the record. And right now we have this parcel in front of us, and just so folks know, the idea is to purchase this parcel from a private individual and also sell something the city owns, the Goldwings Museum, to this individual, correct?
Yes, admittedly, it's complicated, it's involved, but the property that we're proposing to acquire is owned by a company called Sunflow. Sunflow is interested to buy a property that we own in a different location. It happens to be coincidence that they own this and they want to buy that. So we are working on a transaction where the value of the real property can be exchanged. At the end, their property is worth more than our property, and therein lies the extra $30,000 that we're proposing to pay them in addition to the real property exchange in value. But yes, they are looking to acquire the Goldwings building because they're in business of providing senior health wellness services, and that's what they want to do at that commercial site.
And we have a senior housing location nearby.
There is a senior housing complex, public housing, affordable housing that's on that site, and not to mention that it's downtown and it allows for kind of that commercial function as well.
Thank you. And my last question is regarding the Goldwings property. It has been vacant for some time now, and I understand that you yourself have toured it along with staff. And I'm just hoping we can state for the public record the condition or any disrepair that the building has, just in case anyone asks, why would they sell that property? Why didn't they just fix it? It was great as a children's museum. What are the barriers there, or what are we looking at as far as the property current state goes?
admittedly, the condition of the Goldwings building is not great. It needs a significant amount of repair. The buyer is prepared to complete those repairs. I honestly believe that if the city had a need for it, a use for it, then we would consider making those repairs ourselves and putting it in that use. But it was declared surplus because the council determined that it didn't have a need for it, and therefore would be able to dispose of it and allow some private investment to come in and provide that repair.
Thank you very much. And as stated by the potential buyer and in the staff report on the public record, the intention is to use it as a senior facility, a senior, is it recreational facility or senior, excuse me, I don't have the language in front of me.
They're calling it a wellness center.
Wellness center, okay.
So a form of a kind of a community center, recreation center, some health services, nutrition services, is what they're calling it.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Perrella?
Thank you. I want to share with the council. I remember way before I got on council, sitting in the audience with Miss Pat Brown when there was a desire to take away the Boys and Girls Club to build affordable housing or something like that at the Boys and Girls Club on the east side of Oxnard Boulevard. And I also remember sitting in later meetings that the city told the residents that were complaining they were going to lose their Boys and Girls Club playground, that there was a playground further down on Fifth Street that they could go to. But it was brought to the attention that there are lines, that if the youths cross certain lines in the city of Oxnard, they potentially faced getting beaten up. I don't know if Ms. Brown remembers that, but I clearly remember that being said. Ms. Brown brought up some excellent points. I know that the city of Oxnard is doing what it can to provide affordable housing. Mr. Ramirez is acting almost as if a one-armed paper hanger, trying to do everything, trying to get everything done. And he's doing a heck of a job at it. But if we can put the map up of this item, just the map of the area that we would be acquiring, is there any area in that site that the city of Oxnard thinks there could be a park installed?
Do we have a map?
And a two-part question.
We don't have a map.
Okay, we don't have it, okay. Well, the public watches, it's on page 202. Okay, the second is, we have a site that we're gonna sell, and we're being told that it's gonna be used for senior wellness. This gets back to my issue earlier in asking to have an item on the agenda of what can be built in certain areas. Is there anything in stone that will make this company that buys the property provide senior wellness? Or if they decide that they have the wherewithal, could they build a 6 or a 7-story, knock it down and build a 6 or 7-story building there? Being that it's in that core area? Possibly somebody from planning could answer that?
What, sure. I don't know if there's somebody from planning here.
Councilmember, you were asking hypothetically if the owner changes their mind and instead of using it for a senior wellness center, they decide to build a 6-story building? Is that the
Yes,
hypothetical
yes.
you're asking? Okay. So the first part is physically in zoning and all that, can someone put a 6-story building where the old Children's Museum space is?
Councilmember Perrello, so technically the zoning would allow for a 5 or 6-story building. I believe it's in the downtown core. So I believe the height limit in that zone is about 90 feet or about 100 feet, somewhere in that range. I apologize, I don't have the exact number. So yes, they could technically build that tall. That lot though is pretty narrow, so it would be pretty difficult to put something that size on that property.
And I take that to mean it probably wouldn't pencil out and be profitable for them. But there is, why I asked if there was something in stone. We are making a decision, and I appreciate where the staff is going. We are making a decision based on selling a piece of property, buying a piece of property, and the individual that we're going to sell the piece of property to is telling us he's going to do something for senior. But do we have anything in stone? The transaction hasn't happened, but will that be part of this transaction? That he is handcuffed, that he has to do that?
No, sir.
If I was him, I wouldn't enter the transaction if I was prevented.
No, sir, there is not, if you will, a deed restriction that requires him to build what he's proposing to build. So he could demolish and leave it vacant, or he would own it at that point. He would have fee ownership, and he could undertake whatever it is that he would be permitted to do.
Okay, I appreciate that. And just to reiterate, on the other side, in Miss Brown's neighborhood, the chair, long-time running chair of the neighborhood, is there any, in your view, or city manager's view, any area in that neighborhood with all the new building that is going to be going in that neighborhood? And I doubt that they're all going to be adults. I suppose there would be some children, that there is something that would be considered like a possibility for a park. The only thing that I can think of is on the other side of the railroad tracks in the old Skyview Drive-In, but I believe that's all private.
I'm not sure that I'm the right person to answer that question regarding the build-out of a park. Like we mentioned a little while ago, there is some vacant land that is in the vicinity, some of which has already been built as open space, and some of which may be considered for that purpose. Not something, I don't think, that I would bring forth, and so I can tell you honestly that I am not working on that open space
So
development.
I think Michael has some additional information.
And the reason I bring this,
Yeah,
Mayor and council
yeah.
members, there have been neighborhoods that don't have parks and they want parks. And I'll bring for an example, one that comes to mind right off the bat is the Dunes neighborhood. And we've had individuals from Parks and Rec tell them, well, you have X amount of money, you can buy a piece of property, and it would be basically the size of a house lot and build a park. And then the assumption being that the city of Oxnard would take control of it and maintain it. And to the credit of management, they have said, just because you do something and you decide to give it to the city, it doesn't mean the city is going to take the responsibility to maintain it. It's not our priority. We have other parks that we're trying to rehabilitate. And that's the only reason I'm asking. Because there are neighborhoods, and this particular neighborhood, I remember sitting with Pat Brown and a lot of other of the old Lion Guard that would sit in there and ask those questions about, wait a minute, you're taking away the 7th Street Boys and Girls Club? I forget the people's last name, but it was people that had donated it to the city, and all of a sudden we built houses on it. That's why I brought this to the council's attention. Not
Thank you, sir.
criticism of you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, any additional comments? We need a motion on this item.
I will move the recommended action.
Moved by Councilor Basua,
Second.
second by Mr. Gall. Please vote. Oscar, second. Thank you, Mayor.
Motion passes 5-1.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is item M2, and this is a Public Works Department, solid
excuse
waste
me.
refuse rates discussion.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, can we do like a 5-minute break?
What's that?
Can we have a 5-minute break?
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
5-minute break. Okay. Thank you. We're back from a short recess. And our next item is M2. This is a Public Works Department solid waste refuse rate discussion. Recommendation that the City Council, one, provide comments and feedback on the goals, variable input, preliminary scenarios, and the process and timeline for solid waste rates. And number two, direct staff to move forward to the next step in the rate setting process on the basis of scenario 4. And the Public Works Department Transportation Committee approved this item 2-0. And there was a presentation under Measure M, a pre-recorded item by Mr. Michael Wolf. Is there any questions? Michael, do you want to add any additional information? I know we have our consultant here before we continue. Before we do that, Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers on this item, either virtually or?
Mayor Zaragoza, there's no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Okay, Michael, go ahead, and I think you have our presentation by our consultant. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and council members. Michael Wolf, Director of Public Works. As mentioned, this is the solid waste rates discussion. We do have a presentation tonight, if I can get the IT folks to start putting that up. So we have Terry Bovary from Raftellus that will give a presentation about our preliminary financial plan, and then we'll be available to answer any questions. So I'll bring up Terry.
Thank you. Welcome, Terry.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor, council members. For the record, my name is Terry Bovary with Raftellus, and I'm here again this evening. We presented this, we made this presentation back, I believe, on the 16th, if I'm not mistaken, or the 14th to the Public Works Transportation Committee, and we're here tonight to present this to the full council and members of the public. We performed a rate study on behalf of the city regarding the environmental resources ER, and we're going to run you through a somewhat lengthy presentation. One of the things I wanted to offer is if you have questions, we can stop and address them. Just be mindful that that might extend the duration of the presentation sometime, but happy to stay and answer all the questions. The key items for the agenda are, why are we discussing rate increases, key issues facing environmental resources, key steps to conducting a rate study, our methodology, rates and fee design overview, key assumptions, and preliminary rate scenarios that we have some options for you all to consider. So why should the city do a solid waste rate study? The Environmental Resources Division is not like other governmental services. It's an enterprise fund. And this means that rates must be established to cover the full cost of service. It's not funded through tax. It's a nonprofit business. It operates like a business like enterprise. The last time the city approved a cost of service study was in 2012. And we've been facing additional regulations at the state level that have impacted the cost of operations, which we'll discuss a little bit more. And by law, Prop 218 requires that rates must be based on the cost to provide solid waste services. So these are all key points about why a rate study should be done. What are those key issues that are facing solid waste operations? And some of this is are issues that face other elements of business like operations, inflation being one of them. We've talked about inflation, I'm sure, on other subjects, but since 2020, we've seen significant amounts of inflation in the cost of service, and we're going to talk a little bit later on in the presentation about how that affects solid waste a little bit differently than other typical consumer basket of goods, which is baked into the Consumer Price Index by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We're going to touch on the capital reinvestment needs. It's a fairly capital-intensive business operation, not as intensive as your water or sewer operations, but still fairly capital-intensive. There's about $60 million invested in equipment and facilities, the material recovery facility, Del Norte transfer station, as well as all the vehicles and trucks, as you can imagine, to ensure the proper functioning operation for public health and safety for the city. And then the unfunded mandates related to regulatory-driven requirements to provide increased levels of service, waste diversion that bear on the rates and the cost of service. So what are the key steps in conducting a rate study? We developed a financial plan. We look at the specific cost of service, the cost causative function, so what drives cost and who benefits from it. Then we look to design the rates around that. We work through the implementation process through rate adoption, Measure M, the Prop 218 procedures and requirements, which tonight we're looking for some direction around noticing. So what's our methodology? If you look at the graphic to the right, and I know the font's a little bit small, but we have a balance there. On the left-hand side, we have our gross revenues for our business operations, and on the right-hand side, we have what we're defining as revenue requirements, which is comprising the key expenditures, and those include operating costs, capital, debt service payments, and deposits to our reserves for future capital or working capital reserves. And we're trying to balance the scales. We're trying to ensure that the revenues adequately balance against our expenditures. So the objective is to develop a financial plan that funds the revenue requirements and achieves the city's financial targets. And we'll talk a little bit more about the financial targets on some subsequent slides. So the rates and fee design overview, I touched on earlier the process of rate implementation and Prop 218. Agency cannot collect revenues beyond what is necessary to provide the service, so it has to be cost-based. And then we also have to follow certain procedural requirements for adoption with a written notice of the proposed charge mailed to the record owner of each parcel at least 45 days of the public hearing. Prop 26 preceding that sort of formed that foundation, and that the fee need not bear a special benefit of the property so long as the fee bears a reasonable relationship to the burden the fee payer imposes on society. All that to say, you know, that we have certain procedures that we have to go through to adopt fees and charges for service, and that they have to be cost justified effectively in layperson's terms. We're going to use some terminology here this evening, and so we want to go ahead and define rates and fees separately. Rates are fees that would fall under the 218 noticing requirement, and fees would not. Rates are the fees that are more tied to the property, and the fees are not. So tip fees at the Del Norte facility wouldn't, and then the monthly collection fee would for 218. Again, apologies for the font size. These are taken from the city's website, but give a breakdown of the different rates that we charge for service. So I'm just going to briefly touch on the key service levels. For residential rates, we have a 64 and a 96 gallon service. Predominantly 96 gallons is more common. That's about a little less than $31 per month. As I mentioned before, that fee really hasn't changed materially over the last, since 2012 or 13 or so. For residential style service, you have 1, 2, or 3 units. So this could be like a duplex, triplex, quad, those types of residential type units. And they get a similar service to a single family service, but they're residential-like. We also provide that service, as well as to the front load bin service on the right for larger apartment complexes, typically 4 units or more. And that service level is characterized by you can receive service up to 6 days per week, and varies by the size of the container itself. In addition to that, the city provides commercial rates for service. We have small business service, but the predominant service is going to be for the container service at either the 2 or the 4 cubic yard containers. In addition to that, and by law must also offer, as it is with residential, organics and green waste collection service and recycling service. The industrial rates are also offered, and that's related to roll-off service. which is a different style of service than your commercial or your residential. You typically have a truck go out, take a container, drop it off, and then weigh that. And it's typically for larger industrial type operations that have a larger impact on the system. And then these are the fees. So we talked about rates, and now we're going to talk about fees. These are some of the fees that are listed. These are the fees that we charge at the gate for the Del Norte facility. They include refuse, greenway, C&D, and it's charged on a per ton basis, so materials are weighed. We also have some other miscellaneous type charges that are levied to customers. So what are the factors, the key factors that were considered in the rate study? I touched on a few of these items: inflationary assumptions, growth and demand, the budget, the capital improvement plan, existing debt service or capital lease payments, as well as future planned debt and capital lease, and our fiscal targets, like our cash reserve policy at 25% of operating costs, annual operating costs, which we'll touch on more. I want to run everyone through what are our baseline assumptions when we develop the financial plan, the financial projections. We assume the same customer billing statistics for all the scenarios that we ran. We have about a little less than 34,000 single-family residential units, 8,300 multifamily non-residential accounts. The revenues, I just ran through the different types of fees that we charge, so you should have a good idea about the different services we offer. And then the operating expenses, we relied upon the fiscal year 24 budget. And we looked at several years of historical trends, talked with staff, operations staff, worked through what costs within the budget were annually recurring or not, made adjustments as necessary, and in some cases we calculated some of the costs ourselves based on things like waste generation. So our disposal costs that we pay to the landfill are modeled out in more detail other than just applying an escalation factor. In addition to that, on the capital side, a key assumption is that the material recovery facility is approaching or very near end of life and requires replacement. And so we've assumed replacement of that facility in the fiscal year 2026 with construction ending about 27. In addition, the city has made some pretty significant investments in fleet replacement, but there's still many more vehicles that do need to get replaced. And we'll talk a little bit about the cost increases on the capital side in just a moment, but these are some key assumptions. And where we've assumed additional debt, there were two types of terms that we assumed. For the material recycling facility, a facility that would have a very long life, we assumed a 20-year repayment on that loan at about a 5% rate. And where it relates to the vehicles, we assumed a continuation of similar terms, a 7-year capital lease repayment for vehicles. Although we had, I think, a slightly higher interest rate, that 3% versus what you all were able to secure in the market. Yes, sir.
Why do we go 5% on a 20-year and 3% on a 7-year?
Well,
is there a rationale? I mean, is there a standard?
Longer. It's a longer duration maturity, higher interest rate based on yield curve. So we make an assumption of a higher interest rate. But to be quite honest,
is that like standard best practices?
It's standard. It's based on estimates of what we think a reasonable allowance for interest rates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And I would say it's a conservative assumption. We, like I mentioned just now, I think the actual capital lease was in maybe the 2% range. Don't quote me on that. I can double check afterwards and get back to council and the public and everybody, but I know it was less than 3%. And also, for a 20-year loan, 5% is a higher estimate. It could be a little bit less, but interest rate sensitivity on the financial plan is not very high, even though we have a fair amount being issued, particularly as it relates to like 7-year repayments, because there's not a whole lot of interest on a shorter term maturity like that.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to jump into one of the first and major costs of operations, which are the operating expenses. Then we're going to talk about the capital. I have about 3 slides on the operating expenses. This first slide is just to give you a feel for the composition of the operating costs for the system. You can see personnel and disposal costs round out the majority of the costs. With maintenance and fuel, you're right around 75% of the total operating cost. So, personnel, disposal or tip fees, maintenance fuel are some of the larger costs. And then the remaining costs are comprised of contract services, professional services, indirect cost allocations, and some other minor costs. I mentioned earlier that the foundation to the financial plan was the fiscal year 24 budget. The bar charts that you see and the breakdown below categorize those operating costs by the different cost centers. ER outreach or industrial collection or residential collection, you can see the breakdown of the different costs by function. And the other thing you'll notice is that we have a pretty big jump from 24 to 25. And part of that is related to the increase in the ER administration cost center, which has to do with the IUF charges that we assume are going back into effect in 2025. That's about $2 million per year. The average increase over the forecast period is about 4.5% per year, but if you exclude that one bump up in 2025 for the IUF, it's really about 3.5% per year over the forecast period, which is more typical for average inflation. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
On the second one, ER cleanup and illegal dumping, are we going to keep that illegal dumping in the this enterprise fund, or will that go to the general fund?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those costs are going to go to the general fund. That same team, though, does do four paid pickups, so there's going to be a component of that team that stays in ER because we get fees associated with their service if they go pick up bulky items at somebody's house as a request.
Okay.
So, but the bulk of those costs that aren't related to those 4 paid pickups, the illegal dumping, is general fund.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the last slide I have here is just talking and highlighting inflation. The chart on the right shows cumulative change in a few different inflation measures. The red line is our standard CPI, or Consumer Price Index. So this is a measure by the Bureau of Labor Statistics around the typical basket of goods of a single family resident and what their costs have gone up by. And so that's going to include food, rent, things like that. But for solid waste service, we don't have the same basket of goods or proportion of cost. I presented 2 slides earlier that showed labor, materials and supplies, fuel. Not shown on there was capital, but that's an important element of cost too. We touched on that a little bit earlier about a key assumption with the MRF and the vehicles. But the green line, which matches pretty closely to CPI, that's called the Garbage and Trash Index. It's a subcomponent to the Consumer Price Index. So it's effectively a measure of what rates are going up by across the entire U.S. for garbage and trash services. But we think that that doesn't do a good job of really speaking to the true cost increases for services. And so we also looked at Producer Price Index. So what are the cost inputs for solid waste services? And if we look at a weighting of about 50% labor, 35% capital, and about 15% fuel, that's what that blue line looks like on a compounded basis over the same period of time. So the difference between those lines sort of suggests that we think that solid waste rates are going to continue to see cost pressures to move up if other entities haven't already adopted rates. And since 2020, 2021, we've already seen many municipalities in California raise their rates to address SB 1383 and rising costs. And we also, since the last presentation we did more research in relationship to some of the other municipalities and entities in Ventura County to look at when most of them have franchise collection service by a private provider and when they entered into those agreements. So most of those agreements were renegotiated this past year because they were terminating, this month, this year for many of them. And they had to renegotiate. And so we know right now for a fact that Thousand Oaks is going to be raising their rates about $4.50 per month. We know that Camarillo is also going to be raising rates, and Ojai is also. We know that that many of these have indexing provisions as well, pass-through adjustments, you could say, to the rates and fees. So,
And Terry, you said something important, the pass-through adjustments. They don't wait for the rate increases to happen. You know, that's
Yeah.
one of the things that they bring to the Board of Supervisors, you know, the pass-through, so,
Yeah.
to adjust accordingly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we think that you're not alone. That we think that others are, not just with this inflation
That's right.
measure here, but
That's
also in
tremendous
the
amount,
community around us here, we're seeing rate increases.
That inflation for the last 3 years has been just tremendous. You know?
It has been very high. And just anecdotally, if we look at the vehicle costs for a typical garbage truck, forget the fact that there is over a year lead time to get a vehicle. The cost itself has gone up from, what used to be several years ago, maybe 250, 300,000 to 350, north of $400,000 for a typical diesel garbage truck or CNG type vehicle. And if we're going to go zero emission, the current costs for battery garbage trucks are closer to $600,000 when you factor in some of the other investments that are necessary to charge the vehicles. So there are some cost savings with maintenance and things like that, but on the balance of the whole, we estimate it'll be a higher cost into the future. And that is a regulatory requirement that the city is going to be faced in other municipalities within California, compliance with the CARB requirements to have zero emission eventually.
Yeah.
Question.
Councilman Perrella?
With respect to the green line, that was the average across the country.
Yes, sir.
And you've mentioned the requirements in the state of California. A lot of these costs are mandated by the state.
Yeah.
They're not City of Oxnard. And the reason I ask about the green line, are there other states that allow less expensive methods of handling the garbage? Do they burn it, or is there something worst case scenario? Do they do that in other places?
Yeah. Methods of solid waste disposal vary throughout the United States. California used to, but it's moved away from waste to energy incineration. But states like California, Pennsylvania, Florida still perform that, but generally that's more costly. But landfilling is the more predominant method. But I don't think that we see as much diversion, for the average state in the U.S. We don't probably see as much diversion as what we see here, and also some of the regulations that are in effect.
The only reason I was asking that is I would assume that if there are other areas of the country that do it less expensive, it's going to keep that line down. If they had to meet the same requirements as us,
you're right.
It'd go through the roof.
You're right. In other words, I think your point is that, here in California, we have regulatory burdens that maybe other states don't necessarily face, which have a increased cost pressure on the services, and I think that that's a fair point.
Yeah, if we want to live in a clean environment, we're paying extra.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's no debate around the pro con on it. It's just but it does incur more costs. So the capital improvement plan over the next 6 years has identified around $78 million. A big element of that cost is an assumed replacement of the Del Norte facility, which is near end of life, as well as replacing the remainder of the fleet that is aged out for the CNG garbage trucks. And that's going to need to happen over the next several years. In order to do that, we've assumed, so the table that you see before you, the top one breaks down the capital funding requirements by year, by category of costs, and then the table below it, it foots to the expenditures, but shows the breakdown of the funding sources. So how are we funding that? So the first line would be effectively from our cash reserves or our rate revenues. And then the proposed debt and the capital lease is where we're predominantly funding this plan with, because it allows us to maintain lower rate increases. And in order to fully fund everything, plus I think that it makes sense to spread these costs over a longer period of time, given that some of these assets have long service lives, And, future ratepayers can help pay for that as well, since they benefit from those assets through the provision of the service that they receive.
Question is, you mentioned at the beginning to replace the Del Norte facility. Just for people listening to this, are we talking about knocking it down and building a new one, or are we talking about remodeling it, or what are we?
Turn this over.
Yes, good evening, council. We are going to try to propose to utilize the existing infrastructure at the Del Norte site. And so what's included in this proposal is several options, the scenarios of which Terry will get through. The first two don't include capital that would speak to the Del Norte improvement. The last two, those would be scenarios 3 and 4, do speak to capital, and that capital would just be to replace the inside belts and systems associated with the material recycling facility inside the Del Norte shell structure as it is today.
And one reason I asked that question, I imagine somebody hearing replace the Del Norte, people might go, well, where are we going to take the trash while we knock it down and build a new one? That's
And Eric, too, I think last time you also mentioned that our roof, that the MRF needs a replacement too, which is a major capital item.
Yes, we have.
Besides the shell, you mentioned, I think the base of the MRF is in good condition, but we need to take care of the shell and also the roof. Excuse me.
Correct. We have a capital improvements project budget for a multi-million, I believe it's $7 million to replace the roof structure.
Yeah.
That is intact. I mean, that's what we would use in addition to the money you've got here.
Very, very important investment that we have there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now that we've talked about our operating costs, the capital needs, how we're going to fund those capital needs with debt, what would our cash flows look like on an annual basis, and what would our cash reserves do without a rate increase? So the chart that you see on the left is a projection of what we defined as revenue requirements. That's the operating costs, the debt service, the deposits, reserves. And the green line represents the revenues at the current rates. You might notice a slight drop in the green line from 24 to 25, and that's because we were assuming IUF payments from the city back to ER that ends in 2024. So there's a slight dip in the revenues, and then we start up making the payments back to the general fund for IUFs in 2025. And so that's...
Can someone explain for the public what IUF is?
Is the use fund.
Correct. So this would be payment, typically the IUF would be payment from a utility to the general fund for the impacts that they would have on our streets. So it would be paying for paving projects and things like that. Typically the utility companies have an impact on streets that are different than the regular users of a street, and so that's that payment process.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so IUF again is infrastructure use fee, and that gives you a feel for its intended purpose. But you can see that there's a huge gap between the bars, the top of the bars, the funding requirements, and the revenues. So we're in an unsustainable situation where our costs are vastly exceeding our revenues, and some of this has a large part to do with the recent rise in operating costs and the fact that we haven't adjusted rates in some time, and the need to reinvest capital. So it's a confluence of all these things, the regulatory-driven requirements, the IUF, the confluence of all these things kind of happening at the same time that's putting pressure for us to need to raise rates. And so that's basically the key finding. With that, we understand that there's a pretty big gap there. So working with staff, we developed, and the city manager, a number of different scenarios. But before we run through that, I just wanted to make a few important notes about it. It's not final, the rate design. This is an estimate for tonight. It's based on what I would say is the financial plan. It's an estimate of the rate revenue adjustments We've done some preliminary cost allocations already and reviewed that with staff, but we haven't fully designed the rates, and we're working through some billing stats to validate that to ensure we have accuracy in the design of the fees that we would propose to you. So again, this is still in draft format, but should give you a rough idea about what those impacts might look like once we do get through that final stage of doing the cost of service allocation and determine those fees. The other point to mention is that the city will maintain its affordability program, which offers a $25 discount to those who qualify.
And Terry, I think that part is really, really important that we to provide that affordability discount to the folks that qualify, you know, for that. And my understanding too, Michael, that's going to be a yearly thing that per utility.
At the discretion of the council, but it has been a yearly program. Our Project Assist is what we call it. Council recently increased that from $15 to $25.
And that's really important too, because of course there's a lot of residents that are under just plain Social Security or just minimal, you know, monies that they actually get per month. That's going to help them tremendously.
There is some eligibility requirements, but that's correct. Yes,
yeah, thank you.
And to piggyback on that, it's $25 once per year, $25 once a month, $25
per month. Per month, yeah. Thank you.
So here's an overview of those different scenarios we looked at. The first two aren't really applicable scenarios, but they provide sensitivity for context. So the first model sensitivity was, what would it look like with no rate increase and all the capital identified? We actually just presented those charts, but we'll show it one more time. The other model sensitivity is if we were to do rate increases, but we had no capital needs, what would those rate increases look like? And we're going to refer you back to those numbers as we go through the other scenarios so you get a sense for the sensitivity between how much the capital affects the overall rates. I think one of the takeaways, I'll do some foreshadowing, that you're going to find is that a big part of the driver to the rate increase is actually more the operating costs and the fact that that green line that I presented before was so far below the top part of the bar. So when you think about the proportions of how much above that line was operating costs versus the capital, it'll resonate with when you look at the bill impacts that we'll be running you through this evening. In addition to that, we have the 4 scenarios. The first one as a proposal is a rate increase with reduced capital. So we looked at some options with less capital. The second scenario is a variation of the first scenario where instead of front-loading rate increases, we try to phase them in. But in order to do that, we had to assume an interfund loan because there's not enough cash reserves to be able to facilitate a phase-in. The third scenario is similar to the first one, but rate increase, but this time with a full capital. So what would a full requirements plan and rate adjustment look like? And then the last scenario, similar to the second one, is what would that third scenario look like if we phase the increases? Again, we would need an interfund loan to bolster cash reserves in order to do that phase in. And we're going to run you through the financial projections for all those scenarios. I've already stepped you through most of what's on the slide. I think this is just for the record to have an itemized listing of all those key assumptions, many of which we talked about. You know, that the 24 budget was the baseline, the operating expense growth rates, compliance with SB 1383, and other types of regulatory requirements. One of the elements within the CIP is we have assumed a shift to zero emissions vehicles in the outer years and some purchases. So that's baked into the financial plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this was a little bit of a different presentation, but same charts from earlier, and you can see the fund balance drop. And as I mentioned before, if you want to get a sense for the proportions, if you look at the bar, once it exceeds the revenues, if we were to attribute a rate increase to get to the top of the bar, the proportion that's attributable to the operating costs versus the other debt service costs, that gives you a feel. So if we got rid of the capital and we assume that the debt is all related to capital, we would expect that there wouldn't be a huge differential. So I'm going to run right into model sensitivity number 2 now, since the model sensitivity 1 didn't have any rate increases. And then you can see here we show about a 43% rate revenue adjustment. If we were to apply that across the board to all the fees, that would equate to a roughly $13 per month increase to the typical residential service at 96 gallons. We break it down for a 64-gallon container service and a 4 cubic yard commercial, which is a prevalent service level as well, for comparison. If we were to do these rate increases, you can see here that the dotted line matches the tops of the bars visually, and then the projected cash reserves do meet the 25% fiscal policy reserve target by the end of the year. And just for members of the public, and as a reminder, this reserve target is based on 25% of your operating expenses, so a quarter of the year's worth of operating expenses set aside. And during the last presentation, I believe there was some discussion around the city CFO is going to be reevaluating those fiscal policies for their adequacy. So how does that compare to scenario 1? Where we were to do the rate adjustments, but maybe instead of no capital, we have some capital, and we're going to define what that means, some capital. But the monthly increase there would be slightly higher, and it'd be around $14. So for an extra $1 per month, at least in the first year, we're able to accomplish a bit more capital. So you can kind of get a sense for the proportion there with this particular sensitivity. But what we mean by reduced capital is that we're targeting only replacing 50% of the fleet vehicles and doing what you might call Band-Aid improvements to the MRF. So that would be replacing certain lines of equipment, certain conveyor belts in phases, which is not preferable because, as staff can attest, you replace one element of the system because it's all interconnected. It can put increased pressures maybe on other parts of the system, and then they can still break down. So you don't have an optimal situation. It's better when all that equipment gets towards end of life that you replace everything, so that you have a more optimal setup and more reliability and for the service provision. And then here's what that scenario 1 looks like with those rate adjustments. Again, demonstrating by the end of the forecast period, we hit that reserve target. So scenario 2 is the same as scenario 1, same capital. This time, what we're doing is assuming a $5 million interfund loan, which allows us to phase in the rate increases. So instead of $14, we're at $7.55. However, we've got to do that for multiple years, whereas in the last scenario I demonstrated, we did most of the increase in the first year. Here is what that scenario looks like. One of the things that you're going to notice is that the green dotted line is below cost for the first few years as we phase in, and then it has to be above the debt service to rebuild our reserves and pay back that interfund loan. By the end of the forecast period, we end generally at the same position as the other scenarios. In the third scenario, this is where we assume the full capital and what do the rate increases look like. And I mentioned earlier that when we did the partial capital and no capital, the no capital was about $13 per month in the first year. With partial capital is $14, and with full capital we're at $15. So that gives you that sensitivity to the differences in the capital scenarios. We do have some additional monthly increases after that, about $3.70, $2.75, $2.63. per month in each of the subsequent years for the 96-gallon service. But that's more in line or getting closer to just inflationary type adjustments and getting the system back into a good fiscal position from a cash flow standpoint, able to fund operating, able to fund reinvestment in capital and the debt service payments. So what would that, what do the results look like? It looks very similar, and that's by design. So we try to set the rate increases to sort of mirror the same sort of outcomes on the fiscal positions, particularly with the ending cash reserves by the last year, the forecast period, getting to the reserve target. Unlike scenario 2, we get that green dotted line above the bars in the first year. So in contrast, scenario 4, last scenario we looked at, phases in the rate increases, whereas scenario 2 was the phase in for the less capital scenario. The phase in for the full capital goes from about $7 to about $8.70 per month, so a little under $9 per month. And this can be a little bit more manageable given the size of the gap that we have to address. But again, this would require an interfund loan in order to accomplish it in the order of around $5 million, which would be paid back within a 5-year period, very short period of time. So a short-term interfund loan was assumed effectively. And this is what that scenario looks like. So the in the scenarios 2 and 4, our cash reserves are generally lower, particularly in the transition years. But we do get back to the reserve target by the end of the forecast period in both of those phase-in scenarios. Scenarios 1 and 3 are a bit more fiscally stable just because you're not having to do an interfund loan and you're not phasing in the rates. So you're able to meet your funding requirements within that first year. So those are kind of the key differences. Again, I'm sorry for some of the font size, particularly as it relates to the table, particularly for the members of the public who are trying to follow along. But this just is a summary of all those scenarios we talked about, and the monthly bill impacts for the 96-gallon service is at the top right, but in comparison form for all the different scenarios for you. And then we put a chart below it that gives you a sort of visual for the different scenarios and where you end up at by the end of the forecast period. And then I already touched on kind of the key differences between the scenarios. Here's that same sort of comparison of the scenarios, just with identifying the incremental rate revenue adjustments assumed. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any additional questions.
I have about a couple of minutes. You want to go ahead?
You can go first if you'd like,
Okay.
Mayor.
First of all, Terry and Michael, thank you for the presentation. And I know that we had this presentation at the Public Works and Transportation Committee. But looking at the rate study that you did, Terry and Michael and the city manager, I'm inclined to, as per our instructions here, that direct staff to move forward with the next steps. I would personally kind of recommend to staff that we move forward with scenario 4. And the reason is scenario 4, because scenario 4 gives us a phase rate increase. And it gives us full capital to fund, the MRF, to fund all the equipment that we have, to fund, the interior part, the roof and so forth. And also then the inter-fund loan that we can get is paid off in a couple of years, which I think it really will help us quite a bit. And the reason I'm saying that is because I believe that going to scenario number 4 is going to help the ER division, which is an enterprise fund that you mentioned before, self-supporting enterprise fund, that's providing, I believe, excellent service to our residents and to our businesses here in the city of Oxnard. And I think you mentioned there was something like 34,000 residential customers and about 16,000 plus businesses, with a current investment of $60 million in the current facilities. and I'm just generally going to summarize this. It's not, forgive me if I don't make any sense, but I think that this is going to maintain our investment for a long term, something that we need to provide to our residents, and also to I want people to understand that we have not raised rates in 10 to 11 years, to keep up with inflation. But I believe that inflation was 33 or 34%, which I think is really, really important that people understand that we've fallen behind in our cost. And one of the things that you mentioned too was the separating the rates from our cost, service fees. And we talked about the cost of disposal fees, the cost of green waste going up, the cost of construction, demolition, and also the numerous unfunded mandates that the state has provided without any pass-throughs on this at all. So I think that one of the things you mentioned too in your report, Michael, was that we need to follow the best practices to cover our costs. And to me, the refuse division is like any other business. If we don't cover our costs, we're going into the red. And you showed it in your graph. If we don't do a rate increase, if we maintain what we have now, come next year, we're going to be going in the red and falling for the next 5 years. And I don't think no business can survive that. So I think that we need to continue to cover our rates. And I think the people need to understand that whether we do it, a private company does it, we still have to cover those rates, whether it's inflation costs, whether it's replacement of the MRF, of the facilities, whether it's a roof, and our equipment too. We have going to zero, what was it, zero emissions, which I think is really important. So, and as you mentioned too, we have to cover a cost for maintenance, the O&M, cover our capital and infrastructure costs, our legal fees. We need also promote financial viability and also fairness, which I think is really important that we do that. And I think that scenario 4 will help us not just now or tomorrow. It's a long-term investment that I think we need to provide for our residents and our businesses to make it more viable. And again, I want to share with you whether we do it or not. But a private company will come in, and I guarantee you they're going to want their costs, like Harrison does over in the other contract cities. We're going to need to do it whether we do it or they do it. To our refuse staff, our refuse department staff that they're here today, this is our division, this is our MRF, this is our facilities that we need to provide services to our residents, to our businesses. And I think it's important that we do that, and to maintain the affordability of the refuse department. And I know that we have Eric and Michael, and we have really, really good staff that I believe we can have a partnership that can help us maintain the viability of the MRF. And so at this time, I believe that scenario number 4 would be what I would like to see staff continue to look at, And I think, again, as I mentioned before, this is our facility, our residents. This belongs to the people of Oxnard and the businesses. So I really believe that scenario number 4 would be my recommendation. We continue looking at that. Councilman Turan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. It was informative. I like that level of detail. I know that it's getting late, but I feel that it's important for the public to see that and for the council to have that and for folks to know this is an intentionally transparent process. I have a couple questions, and I think some of them might be for Mr. Wolf or staff or for Terry, but first one is based on the presentation, and I know you and I had this conversation prior regarding the fleet replacement and electrification. Can you remind me what the statute says or what the goal is of the state for electrification of our fleet?
So there is an assembly bill or state bill In fact, we're bringing it to the PWTC next week and to the council the following week. We have to make a decision about an option to have zero emission vehicles. One of the options is to start that at a percentage January 1st, 2024. All of them, actually, the two options require us to start something in January 1st, so basically less than a month from now. Zero emissions, depending on what option we select or what the council ultimately selects, will dictate the percentages of that. But over time, the idea here from the state or from CARB is that over time, replacing vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles with alternative fuel vehicles, meaning electrification or hydrogen, and it's for certain types of vehicles over 8,500 pounds.
And that would include our large trash collection trucks, correct?
At some point in time, yes. So there's some exemptions in those. There's some temporary exemptions and long-term exemptions in those rules. One of those exemptions would be if there's not a market for that vehicle right now, we can get an exemption. That's actually, we have to ask for that exemption. There's some built-in exemptions for emergency vehicles like fire trucks, but yeah, that is correct.
Okay. And it would certainly include other vehicles we use, such as the ones for the collection days that we have, right, for neighborhoods and larger vehicles that are over that weight threshold, correct?
Gross vehicle weight of over 8,500 pounds, that's correct.
Yes. Okay. So my follow-up question to that, and thank you for that information, is what infrastructure do we currently have to charge those vehicles when needed if they're going to be electric vehicles?
Currently, right now, the city has one electric vehicle charging facility that's here at the parking structure. We also own one that's open to the public. We also have some at the OTC, but we do not have any city-specific or city exclusive charging stations for our vehicles now. We have been in discussions with Gold Coast about potentially having access to their CNG fueling station, and they're proposing a hydrogen fueling station, but we don't have any city-owned ones other than...
And that's Gold Coast Transit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And just ballpark, does it need to be exact? How many vehicles would be affected by this?
262, I think, is the number in our staff report, so about 260.
All right, and so it would be a long line at our two charging stations right
Correct.
now. Okay, and I asked that because the current infrastructure, as you mentioned, is two spaces with potential for partnering on other spaces or other facilities. So if we were to invest in more infrastructure to charge these vehicles, whether they be electric or to fill them if they're hydrogen-based vehicles, would that be a capital expense for that investment?
Correct.
Okay. And the state's not providing any funding for that. We have to do it as a city, right, through our enterprise fund?
This is generally considered an unfunded state mandate. Now, they do have some competitive grant processes, but they certainly are not to the one-for-one from a dollar standpoint for these costs. So yes, that would be, in my consideration, an unfunded state mandate.
Thank you. And I asked all those to demonstrate there are a number of unfunded mandates we have in relation to this particular enterprise fund. And that's just one example of we do need to start transitioning our fleet to either electric or hydrogen, as the Public Works Director mentioned. Yet we also don't have infrastructure right now if that were to happen tomorrow or next month, because next month is already 2024. And the state says, you need to do this, good luck with it. And so that is an unfunded mandate where we are obligated to do this. We don't have the infrastructure for it, so now we need to plan for that. And through a capital program, as is mentioned in the presentation, is one of the ways we do that. And capital things would also be like the roof replacement or the facility replacement, or would large machinery that does sorting and all that also be capital expenses?
That's correct.
Yes.
We would categorize that as equipment, but yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I have another question after this, but first I want to just make a point around this, and the mayor touched on it. When we look at the cost of doing business, the cost of operations for the solid waste division, for our enterprise fund, costs have risen for commodities. So like if I owned a restaurant, just the cost of eggs going up, as we saw earlier this year, I'd have to raise the cost of my sandwiches that either have eggs in them or use eggs as one of the ingredients to make the bread or whatever. The cost of milk and juice go up. The drinks on my menu have to go up. As utility prices go up, like electricity and gas, that's now going to be reflected in my rates across my menu, right? As the cost of living goes up for my employees, I now need to consider increasing their wages, which now increases my labor costs, which now has my menu go up again across the board. That's just what I need to do to keep my business viable, to keep my business going. I can't operate in the red. I won't operate for very long. So folks who say that government should be run like a business, in its most basic form, if you are putting out more services than you're bringing in revenue, that's a structural deficit. And in order to get out of that, you either reduce your expenses, you increase your revenues, or both. And when we talk about our solid waste here, when we look at ER, reduction of services, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be reduction of actual what, collection? Or would that be people's trash, all 3 containers, only picked up every other week? Is that something people would prefer? If someone's ever accidentally missed a week, putting out their trash container, look how quickly that piles up when you have double the trash going out. So I can't imagine much leeway in the way of reduction of services for solid waste. When we look at the facility, and most of the public sees the collection part, but behind the scenes, there are many, many operations happening at the facility out on Del Norte that I think folks should be aware of. And it's a huge operational cost that happens there when machines break or they become outdated and we need to upgrade them or replace them because parts aren't made anymore. That's a cost, and it's not a cheap cost. When you look at just what we talked about with our fleet, replacing those vehicles as required, those don't just fall out of the sky, or we don't just, have the public works director go with his credit card to the Ford dealership and say, I want to buy one of these trucks. Right, Michael?
I hope not.
Yeah, but these are all expenses that come into play here, and these rates have to pay for that, which goes to my next point here. I'm sure the question is going to come up, what happened to Measure E? Why is Measure E not covering this? Why are we paying extra sales tax, and yet we now have to raise our trash rates? And I'm hoping we can speak to that real quickly.
Correct. So as Terry mentioned, the solid waste is an enterprise fund. It's a utility fund, and it's separate and apart from the general fund. It is responsible for maintaining its own integrity from a operational standpoint. So those two funding sources don't mix for that purpose.
And 218 won't allow that anyway.
Well, the 218 process is a process by which we would have to set the rates, but I think Councilmember Turan's point is that the enterprise fund operating as such is independent and separate from the general fund.
Yes, that's my point. Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. And as an enterprise fund, we have a few enterprise funds. We have trash, we have water, wastewater, and then the golf course. And those, as you mentioned, those almost operate like their own separate business, certainly separate from the general fund, which is what Measure E goes into. So think about them that way, folks. They're completely separated. And like any business, as I just mentioned, it has to be able to at least cover its costs. In the example I gave of my restaurant, I can just raise the rates. I don't have to send a notice out to my customers and say, hey, I'm thinking about raising my rates. 100 days from now, I'm going to have a couple public meetings. You can come out, tell me what you think. I'm going to propose what I'm thinking about for a rate. No, I would just do it, right? That's what I have to do. However, our enterprise funds and government entities are tied to Proposition 218. And that's the process we're in right now. And as a business, we need to make sure that revenue and expenditures are not upside down and we're not operating a structural deficit. Now, the thing is that our solid waste as an enterprise fund has to cover its costs. So folks may see oil and gas and finance and other industries recording record profits. You may hear that in the news. I can assure you that the enterprise funds are not going to, in a few years, if we adjust these rates, they're not going to be recording record profits. What we're going to be doing is having our rates set at a way that they are covering the cost of operations and looking towards a sustainable business through the end of this decade and beyond. And we have to think not only about what it costs to collect the trash every week, but what it costs to process it and sort it and have it out on the market and where it goes and what it costs to have that facility and maintain that facility, maintain that fleet, and keep those employees who are doing this work every single day in a sustainable position as well. So along with what the mayor said, I will agree that scenario 4 seems to be a reasonable path for us to look at, where we're going to have a phased approach. We'll look at possibly an interfund loan, as was mentioned, and we can continue to provide full service, but it sounds like we can also evaluate what operations and services look like in the future with these new rates, if we move forward with this. Is that correct, Mr. Wolf?
That's correct. Can I make it just 2 comments real
Absolutely.
quick? Because I think you made some interesting observations and some points, and I wanted to say the restaurant example, some people may say, well, you can't, that's the only restaurant to go to. Where else do I go? That's not the case for us either. You can opt out of our services. You can do self-hauling. So there's alternatives to our service as well. So it's not like we're forcing you to have to do that service. But there's health and safety requirements in terms of how long people can keep refuse at their property, things like that.
And you know what is a health and safety issue? If you don't pick up trash for a week or 2, that's a health and safety issue for the community. Just like flushing the toilet or you turn the faucet, you want water. Yeah. Refuse is just as important.
And correct, Mayor. And the other thing I would say is that when folks may be talking about, well, there's other ways that instead of increasing rates is decreasing the cost of doing those services. And I would say, as part of our presentation, my Measure M presentation and the staff report, we do talk about some of our efficiencies that we're doing to make sure we keep our costs down, grants that we're going after. So we not only just look at increasing rates, but we look at ways to be as efficient as possible. And as you mentioned, some of those state unfunded mandates make it difficult for us to do that. When the mandates come down, we have to change our service or, otherwise modify our operations. But we do take a good look at those services and how best to provide those. And I'll give you an example, which I don't think most folks will recognize, is it costs us a lot of money when there's contaminated trash. We have to sort through that. Staff members sitting over here to the right have staff members that work for them that do that every day. And so the more that we can incentivize or inform our customers about not doing that, the less cost it is for them in the long run, right? The less we have to actually sort through that and pull that out and do things. So there's those resources and those education that we try to instill with folks that we can keep those costs down so they can control their own costs by helping us out with that process. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. And the last point I'll make, Mayor and Mr. Wolf, you'd mentioned, folks can vote with their wallet, as I mentioned earlier this evening. They could certainly choose to self-haul if they wanted, and that could go on for as long as they can sustain that. But when we look at our neighboring cities, as was presented in I think it was the Measure M presentation. I don't know if it was in the Reftelis one. But when you look at our neighboring cities, the rates are actually higher than what we have, and the cost per resident or cost per household is lower in the city of Oxnard than it is for any of the other neighboring cities.
Per capita, right?
Per capita. And it's not like we're keeping up with the Joneses here. We're actually having to cover our costs. If you look at our ACFR, you will see that we have had declining revenues or rising expenditures versus revenues going on for a while now. And the last thing I'll say, though, is I know this is going to affect folks, and I remind folks, just like we did with our last rate consideration for water, we're voting to raise rates for ourselves too. We are all residents of the city of Oxnard. If it comes to that and we adjust rates to raise them, I mean, that's for us too. We don't get a pass. We don't get a discount. But I also want to remind folks, for those who have who see this potentially being a hardship in the future if rates are raised, as was mentioned, Project Assist is in place. It's $25 off of your utility bill for the 3 enterprise funds that we have in the city. And from what I recall being on finance and governance, every year we operate, there's been more people applying, but we don't exhaust those funds every year. So there is room for more people to apply who are eligible to do so, and I hope folks will do so. All right, those are my comments and questions.
Thank you.
Mayor. Thank you,
Council
Mr.
members,
Wolf.
council members, any other council members want to make some comments on this item? Council Perrello?
Yeah, I appreciate the information. A couple of questions. Going with the clean power vehicles, I appreciate Ashley getting some water. The range of the clean power vehicles is going to be less than what we currently have. And the time to charge them may lead us to need to have double the amount of trucks that we have now.
It'll be more than what we have now. The idea here is we service 1,000 to 1,200 residential homes per route. And I doubt right now that a electric vehicle that size of that truck can make that route in one charge. And so there's going to have to be a conversation about how that process works in the future in terms of more vehicles, basically.
I appreciate the state is telling us to do this, and I like breathing clean air and everything else, but I don't want to be in the cutting edge, the first guy that tries out the model car or truck or electric vehicle, because usually it's a little bit of a crapshoot, and then you've stuck. I also want to make this comment a little separately. I appreciate that at the Public Works Committee meeting, there were a lot of staff from solid waste that were here, and I appreciate you guys being here again. You get to hear some of the thought process of the people that are making the calls and the management that provides it for us. I remember what happened some years ago when there was a rate increase. I went for take the biggest shot right now. It's almost like having to get a shot when you're a kid. You don't want to get a shot. You don't want to get a booster. You don't want to do this. But take the first shot, get it over with, and move on down the road. I would be inclined to go, I am inclined to go with a larger step and get it done with and move on and be in a better situation. My rationale. I don't like waiting for something to happen similar to what, and if I can bring this as an example, we waited, the city, years over time, waited way too long to repair the sewer plant. And now we're having to repair it stages and make sure that we can get it. Up jumps the devil, we can't get the parts. Something happens and it takes longer. I'd rather be more flush, be able to take care of what we need in the build, in the refuse enterprise fund. I do appreciate that $25 a month would help people that qualify. They have to qualify. And I understand the big shock of the highest rate, but if I'm looking at page 223, the very last graph that we have in this thing, I'm sorry, beg your pardon. It's not the last graph. Page 223, scenario 4 and scenario 3, the first year, the rate would be an increase of $15.39. Am I reading it correctly?
Yes.
If we go with scenario 4, it's $8.70. But if we continue in the next 4 years, the increase goes $3.69 versus $8.70, $2.74 versus $8.70, $2.63 versus $1.71, and $1.66 versus 0. I personally like the concept of 3. I do understand it's going to be a shot to a lot of people, but nothing is cheap. Nothing is cheap. And the trash is a big component. Public, I don't want to, with all respect to the people that are working here, I like the trash truck coming when he's supposed to. I like him picking it up, don't spill it, don't break the top of the lid, put it back down, and no neighbors are coming and knocking on my door, what the hell's going on with the guy driving the truck? They're doing a good job. I get compliments. I get compliments for the people we have. By the other side, there are residents that come and go, why don't we go with a private hauler? Who are you taking care of in this city? You taking care of the residents, or are you taking care of the people that work for the city? There comes a time when those discussions have to be had. The scenarios that we've put together here, we can continue working with what we have, the people that we have working for the city. And I personally think 3 is from my way of looking, I'm not gonna qualify for the discount thing. From my way of looking, that's the best thing for the city of Oxnard. I don't know how the rest of my council, I've heard one member give his opinion, and that's what we're doing, back and forth, sharing opinion. Bottom line, everything costs more. When I go and I try and get the cheapest gas I can, I still get blown away. $100 to fill up my car. Holy Toledo, that's a lot of money. I can remember that maybe later in the evening I'll be eating a hamburger. Used to be a couple of bucks for a hamburger. Not anymore. Not anymore. And going out and buying a beer used to be a couple of bucks. Not anymore. So those are my views.
Thank you.
Terrific presentation. And I complimented you. At the Public Works, you did a hell of a job. Your firm and having you guys come in and explain things. Unfortunately, take a look to your left. Take a look to your left. How many members of the public are here?
Let me,
It blows me away. It blows me away because I remember years ago when Councilmember McDonald and Councilmember Madrigal were here, we had people raging and they wanted blood. You gotta face reality, things go up.
Mr. City Attorney, we're gonna go past 10 o'clock. Do we need a motion to continue past
I'll
10?
make the motion to continue past 10 o'clock.
Motion by Perrello, second by Teron. Please vote. You-
We can come back another day.
We gotta
Please vote.
realize, these gentlemen, most of them probably gonna go to work pretty
We're
early in
almost
the
done.
morning.
We're almost done.
You're gonna go to work pretty early in the morning, so it's like you get it over with. 5 o'clock over there, okay.
Okay,
Motion passes 6-0.
Staff wants to go home.
we'll continue. Council members, no? Councilmember Madrigal?
Real quickly, I'll just agree with what Councilmember Perrello said. I know it's a big ask, and I actually would be in favor of scenario 3, but I know getting that passed would be actually a difficult task. But looking at it through a 5-year plan, it's actually cheaper than scenario 4. Long-term, it's just the first initial hit is what's gonna drive a lot of people to not go for it. But looking at it through a 5-year lens, it's actually a whole lot cheaper. Thank
Yeah,
you.
the total percentage across the 5 years would be less in those scenarios where we're not phasing them in. Yeah, that's correct. That would be the advantage of those scenarios.
But that particular scenario. Council,
I agree with my colleagues. Thank you.
what
Scenario
scenario?
3.
3, okay. Oh, okay, we're good?
Mr. Mayor, before we go too far down this motion, I just wanted to.
I'm sorry, you're really looking for feedback, and that's the feedback that you're getting right now.
Correct, so I just wanted to make sure there's no
right.
comments. Staff report page 208, one of the recommendations is to provide any feedback on those
That's
five
right.
five items. Since there's not any feedback, we'll continue forward with those.
Okay.
I also want to make mention that right now our timeline is a Prop 218 notice, if we're going to go forward, Prop 218 notice in early January with a rate hearing in March. Right now, we're trying to target the first council meeting in March. But as we get through the Prop 218 process, we may have to make that adjustment. But right now, first meeting in March.
And I want to thank you and our consultant and our refuse staff. We need this rate increases because if not, we're going to go into the red, and we don't want to go into the red. And we're not here to make profit. We're here to provide a service and also to make sure that we maintain our reliability and our financial status for the residents of Oxnard.
And whichever way we go, we learned over decades a hell of a lesson with the sewer plant and what happened with the sewer plant.
And I have a lot of faith in the refuse department because they provide good service. And I want to reiterate to the public, whether we do it or somebody else does it, we're going to have to pay for it anyway, regardless. And it's not going to be cheap if we go the other route. I believe that our people are doing a good job. One additional question.
Looking at the staff recommendation, they asked that we provide comments and feedback, which we've done. They're also asking we direct staff to move forward with the next step in the rate setting process on the basis of, and they reference scenario 4, but I heard some of my colleagues favoring scenario 3. Does staff need specific direction on which scenario we'd like to go with?
Yes, please.
So we take a vote on Okay, let's take I make a motion that we can go with scenario 4.
I'll second.
Second. Okay, so please vote.
Can we,
What is
can we put the scenarios up on the board really quick, just so we can clarify that we've got our numbers correct?
Because I know scenario 4, you know, it's a phase rate. It does a
Correct. Well-
full capital, and it's an fund loan, and
Correct. So scenario 4 would be the phased-in approach, which I believe that some of the council members were not in favor of. That was the staff recommendation. So it would be the phased-in approach, full capital, and that would be requiring to borrow money. And we'll get the slides up.
And
Go
I think
back one.
that the phased approach is going to help not only our residential people, but our business people, so they can budget accordingly, which I think is really important for our business community too.
So that would be the bottom one there. Actually, there's probably a better slide with the numbers on it. Yeah, that would be the best one to look at. Scenario 4. So we're looking at the 96 gallon. You can see in that scenario, you have a phase and approach where you have 870, 870, 870, and then $1.71, and then zero.
Zero and 29.
And then what I heard some of the council members talk about was scenario 3, which when you look at it is all of that initial increase
See, because a $15
would
increase.
occur in that first year, and then you'd have some smaller increases in the out years. So that's the difference between scenarios 4 and scenarios 3.
So that to me, that's my reason I like 4 is because it's a long-term investment, and we need to take care of our infrastructure. We need to take care of our buildings. A lot of deferred maintenance is happening to our buildings, and so we basically need to take care of. That's where I'm coming from. So I make a motion for 4 and second by Teron.
For discussion too, I just, I don't think there's any wrong scenario to this. No matter what, we realize the black and white, that something's got to get done. My main reasoning for scenario 4 is, number one, we're maintaining our capital program, our full capital program, which scenario 3 also does. But I'm just trying to ease the initial raise that we'll see. But I'm not opposed to 3. I just like 4 better. That's it.
And City Attorney, to make another motion, we have to find out what happens with this one to make another motion. Because I would make a motion to go with Route 3.
But we don't, I had a motion.
We have a motion for number 4.
And the first is second.
So I have to wait till find out what happens with 4 to be able to make another motion.
I think
Generally, that is what you would do unless you want to get deep into parliamentary procedure.
Whatever happens, I'm making a motion for number 4.
We got a motion for 4 and second by Teron, so please vote.
So may I ask, I understand Mayor, your phase-in approach, but Councilman Perrello, maybe I missed it. You just would rather take off the Band-Aid quickly?
I'd rather peel the bandage off and move on.
Because
Because you need it.
what is it? Scenario 3 is actually cheaper long-term than 4.
In the long run?
Yeah, in the long run, 3 is cheaper.
But what do we accomplish with the 3 all the way?
So 3 and 4 accomplish the same thing with respect to operations, capital expenditures, equipment replacements. It's the same amount of costs. The difference between those is we're either phasing it over time, which as Councilmember Madrigal mentioned, actually when you add up the total is more when you phase it over time, because we have to borrow about $5 million, you have to pay it back, so there's interest for that. So scenario 4 represents an actual larger cost to the customer base over those 5 years.
So Mayor, if we go with scenario 4, they're paying additional money because now we're borrowing money that they have to pay back. So if we take a hit and take off the Band-Aid, then it's the phase-in approach. Will be less expensive to the taxpayers.
And I would think that if we had the money up front, 3, you'd be able to accomplish more things that you need versus postponing until we get a little more money. I would think, I don't know, but.
Yeah, it's actually technically the same, but I think where you're going, Councilmember Perrello, is that certainly we don't have to wait for that cash revenue to show up if we wanted to start doing design work for capital projects or otherwise getting equipment replaced much faster. So yes, to that point.
But 4 and 3 cover the full capital and so forth.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I just summarize? 3 is cheaper for the ratepayers.
Okay, then if that's the case, then why argue?
I'd like to call the question.
Okay.
Let's just vote.
Okay.
Okay, so to repeat, this is the motion for scenario 4.
4, yeah. Okay, please vote.
Motion fails.
3-3.
Okay. I'd make a motion for scenario number 3.
Second.
Please vote. Oh, I'm sorry, who seconded? Okay, first by Perrello, second by Madrigal. Please vote.
Motion passes 4-2.
Okay. 3 it is. Thank you. You got direction?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, and a good presentation, by the way, and thank to all the staff that are here today.
Thank you for the deliberation.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is item 3. This is Public Works Department, agreement number 324000156 with Nakamura Taradam Architects Incorporated for architectures and engineering services for the wastewater division new maintenance building project. Recommendation that the City Council approve and authorize the mayor to execute an agreement with Nakamura Architects Incorporated for the amount of $1 million for the architecture and engineering services. And this item did not originate in committee, and it's a capital improvement project specifically listed in the city's capital improvement program budget, which was previously approved by the City Council. They did have a Measure M presentation by Mr. Hi, Michael. Mr. Suri. Okay, any additional questions on this item, council members? Good. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Nice presentation, but on page 11 of the 38 staff, page 308, item number 27, it says Iran Contracting Act. And I first read that. I've had an explanation, but there might be somebody else that has read it and they may have a question. Can someone explain what the Iran Contracting Act is and why it is in this item?
Councilmember Perrello, El McCarran, Assistant City Attorney, appearing remotely.
How are you?
Good. Sorry to just jump in here. This is required under the state's public contract code. It was put in place about 13 years ago in response to federal economic sanctions against Iran. So this is something that the state did as an add-on to those sanctions. So any municipal entity in the state and even the state itself that's going to have a contract that's worth over $1 million has to have that vendor service provider fill out this certification stating that they do not do more than $20 million in investments or work with any type of business or the government of Iran. And there are certain exemptions. We've never seen an exemption come through in our contracting experience here. I think all of our contractors certify that they don't do any business in there. And this clause is included in every single contract, public works, professional service, trade service, et cetera, that's over $1 million for the city.
Are there any other nations that fall under this category?
There's no other statutory mandates by the state. There are some executive orders that were put in place maybe about 1.5 years ago that you're supposed to make sure you're not doing business with any type of company that has ties to Russia, but it's not a statutory mandate.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it, thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
the only question I have.
Okay, council members, need a motion on this item?
Excuse me,
Second.
excuse me, Chair.
Oh, no speakers?
There are no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Okay, we've got a first by Council Valenzuela, second by Perello. Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, our last item is Public Works Department, agreement number 3240074 with Quest National Holdings, DBA Quest National Security, for security guard services at various city locations. Recommendation, the city council approve and authorize the mayor to execute an agreement with Quest National Holding, DBA Quest National Security, for an initial term starting January 1, 2024 and ending December 31, 2024, with the option to extend through December 31, 2028, for a total contract not to exceed $56 million for security guard services at various locations. The Public Works Department Committee outcome was unknown at the time of the agenda, so therefore this is where we're at. And also there is this was a presentation under Measure M, which was a pre-recorded item, and we do have Michael Wolf for any additional questions. Council members, any questions on this item?
I don't have a question, but
Go
just,
ahead.
it's printed that it didn't come to the Public Works Committee, but it did come to us after the printing. It was a
Right.
tremendous presentation. And I'd
Right.
just like to share, one of the questions that I asked at that meeting, the individuals that are armed guards, wherever they are located, our police department is aware where they're working. And the issue of the dedicated patrol vehicle, wanted to make sure, because the Ventura Sanitation District had an issue with the patrol vehicle that, not them, somebody else, there was no insurance on it. And there is insurance on this. Those are the only points.
Yeah, and the other question that I had, Michael, was the armed guard is going to be over at the water yard on 3rd Street, because the sensitivity there and the security for our water.
That's correct, it's an essential facility, yes.
Yeah. Council members, any other questions? Need a motion?
Excuse me, Mayor Zaragoza.
Any speakers? I was going to ask that question.
There are no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Okay, motion by Vasua, second by
Second.
Duran. Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Michael, and we're 8 minutes over. Thank you. And we are adjourned. Thank you so much.